about today. We're talking about the coming of Christ. And, you know, when you're waiting for something to happen, you're filled with anticipation because you know something's going to happen. You might not know exactly when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but you know something is going to take place that maybe is different than you've ever experienced before. And that's what the people of God were in expectation for. They were waiting, but not just for a couple minutes for popcorn to pop, right? They were waiting for thousands of years. They've been waiting and asking and praying and seeking the face of God for the promised Messiah to come to this world. And of course, there were many prophecies that had been given about this very fact that Christ was going to come. Let's take a look at just one of those. Of the coming of the Messiah, Isaiah had said in chapter 7, these words have been written. It said, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." And so this is the result of that prophecy found in Matthew chapter 1, verse 22 and 23. It says, "All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. Mathematics and astronomy professor Peter W. Stoner made this statement. He said, "The chances of having 8 prophecies coming into existence, coming true, coming to fruition by sheer chance is 1 in 10 to the 17th power. 1 in 10 to the 17th power. I mean, what does that really mean? Let me give you kind of a word picture of that. That would be like taking silver dollars and stacking them 2 feet deep in every square inch of the state of Texas. I mean, that's a big state. And so every square inch is covered with 2 feet full of silver dollars. And somebody had taken one of those silver dollars and marked it specifically and threw it out somewhere in the state of Texas. And then they asked somebody, "We need a volunteer," and they would come up and they would be blindfolded. And they would say, "You can walk anywhere in the state of Texas and try to find this one coin, and you only get one chance to figure it out, to pick it up." That would be about the same odds of 8 prophecies coming together and coming true. And the reality of it is, for the coming of Christ, most scholars say that there are over 300 prophecies that have come to fulfillment through the person of Jesus Christ. This is no random, freakish accident. This is the fulfillment of the Son of God coming to this world in which we live. This is what everyone was anticipating. This is what everyone was waiting for. This is what everyone was praying for. But Jesus comes in a way that no one would ever have imagined. There's no pomp and circumstance. There's no parade. When the Messiah shows up, it's quite the opposite. Now, I've been told this was a pretty cool experience for me. I got a call this week. I was at the bank actually depositing some checks, and I got a phone call randomly, and the clerk was just finishing up, and I pulled the phone out of my pocket, and it was Rochelle Oliver. And I said, "Do you mind if I take a call?" She said, "No, go ahead." And I said, "Hello, it's Pastor Bruce." She said, "This is Rochelle, and I'm with my daughter, and she's going to have a cesarean C-section for a baby to be born, and would you pray with us?" And right there in the bank, I was able to pray with them, and they delivered, is it Molly? Millie? Miley May Michelle Wagner. Is that right? 7 pounds, 20 inches long. And that's an exciting thing that we praise God for. But if you've ever had a child in a hospital, take yourself back there. But instead of finding yourself in a hospital, think of a shack. Instead of being on a hospital bed that adjusts, think of a dirt floor. Instead of a nurse or a doctor that's there to aid you, think of a donkey and a cow. And instead of having the aroma of the place of a hospital, think of the aroma of a barnyard. I mean, Jesus didn't come in the way that people expected him to, but he came. Here's a word picture from C.S. Lewis when he writes these words. He says, God ascended to reascend. He comes down from the heights of the absolute being into time and space, down into humanity, down to the very roots in the seabed of the nature he had created. But he goes down to come up again, and he brings the ruined world up with him. He has this picture of a strong man stooping lower and lower to get himself underneath some great complicated burden. He must stoop in order to lift. He must almost disappear under the load before he incredibly straightens his back and marches off with the whole mass swaying on his shoulders. It's an image of Jesus coming and taking care of this broken world in which we live. And so, as we walk through the Bible, of this long story short series that we're in, we are jumping into the New Testament. We're looking at John chapter 1, verse 1, when John writes these words. And he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And if you're reading these words or listening to these words that John penned together, that we just read in this verse, it would take you back to the very beginning of the writings of Moses, when he wrote, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if you were a Greek follower, you would know that Logos is the one who created the world, and Logos is the Greek word for word, for the word word. So when John starts penning this together, the bottom line is everybody can relate to it. Everybody can understand that the beginning of the Word was the Word. And they're all connected with that statement, but just because they're connected with it doesn't mean that they all are on the same page. We think of Jesus coming and dying and everything that he did. What is the gospel message? What is the good news? Gospel means good news, but what is that good news? The good news isn't just following a set of commandments. It isn't just a way of life or being. It isn't a mindset. The gospel is a person, the person found in Jesus Christ. Listen, we don't put our faith in a religion. We put our faith in a person. And that's a big distinction. That's why Paul writes in Romans 10:9, he said, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. We're saved by the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus is the central object of our faith. Jesus makes everything new. And we need to understand this, right? The purpose of the life that Jesus lived, the purpose-filled death, which he died on the cross, and rose from the dead. If we don't understand what the gospel message is, this good news, in Christ coming to this world, how would we ever explain it to anybody else? I mean, the question we could ask ourselves is, is how did I ever explain, did I do anything to share this gospel message with anybody else this past week? How did I participate in the gospel of John chapter 1 in this last given week? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God. That word, Logos, Jesus, is the same essence, the same person of God. So we see that the Word is all God, but not all of God. Think of it this way. If you're a player on a team, basketball team or football team, on the back of your jersey, you probably have your name and a number, but on the front of your jersey, everybody looks the same. So that name and that number is the distinct part of who you are on that team. And so when you find yourself on that football field or when you find yourself on that basketball court, everything you do is distinct in your position and what you're supposed to be doing with the ball and the way that you handle yourself among the team. But it's for a greater purpose. It's a greater identity, this team that's working together to get the ball down the field, to get the ball down the court. And John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Now that word was is a state of being. Jesus was with God. Was. Jesus didn't just come to be, he was. I mean, he was in the beginning. In fact, Jesus was before the beginning. We jump down to verse 14. It says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen the glory of the one and only Son who comes from the Father, full of grace and truth. The birth of Jesus marked the beginning of Christ's life here on this earth, but not the very beginning, not his beginning. Just like when we're born of the Spirit, we recognize that it isn't just now all of a sudden God is at work. God has been working all around us the entire time, but now when we open our heart and life to him, it's the beginning of him working in us and working through us. When we put our faith in God, all of a sudden everything changes. Everything of who we are becomes something more because the Spirit of God is at work within us and transforming us by the renewing of our mind. These are some pretty basic foundational concepts, but sometimes it takes us a minute to get our mind wrapped around them, the way that John writes. If we go back to verse 3 through 5, John says, through Christ, through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus, coming to this world in which we live, changed everything, makes everything different. And because of that, the result of that is even now, darkness is being overcome by the light because Jesus came. Someone is being made new in the image of Christ because Jesus came. People are rising to the occasion for the purpose that God has put into their heart and their life to fulfill because Jesus came. We experience the fullness of God because Jesus came. The concept of this idea that Jesus was fully God and fully man at the same time is something that your church has wrestled with for centuries. You have both the divine and you have humanity coming together as one. God is both God, Jesus is both God and man at the same time. I mean, that's a huge concept because all other religious leaders from all the other religions in the world never claimed that They themselves were God. And so when we read through the Gospels, we see Jesus freely declaring that about himself. Right? Here's one with John chapter 10, starting with verse 30, when Jesus said, "I and the Father are one." Again, the Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus said to them, "I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of these do you stone me?" So we're not stoning you because of the good works they replied, but because of blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. Jesus claimed to be the same as the Father. The Father and I are one. It's what brought him to the place where he was crucified on a cross. And many people have argued that when the disciples wrote those in the four Gospels, this idea of what Jesus had said about himself to God, they said it was something they made up. It was just something they put in there. But listen, it wasn't just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that wrote about it, but thousands of people that experienced everything that Jesus was when he walked on this earth, when he came from heaven to earth. And no one disproved it. Those that experienced the fullness of Christ when he was here. In the end, these four authors died a bloody, brutal, murderous death. Those that made this claim. And the question would be, if they're making it all up, why would they die such a death for a lie such as that? These are the people that walked with Christ. Those that wrote about him are the ones that saw the miracles. They're the ones that were there and witnessed him dying and saw him put in the tomb and then spoke with him afterwards as he rose from the dead. I mean, you would die for someone if you knew that you were following the God of all creation. You would die for someone who was dead and rose again and spoke with you and fed you fish afterward and spent time with afterward. Here's the amazing thing, and we didn't put it, I forgot to put this in your outline, but it's worth writing down. Jesus is not a story about a man becoming God. Jesus is a story about a God becoming man on purpose. And he did it for you, and he did it for me. Everything that Jesus did was almost backwards. It was opposite. But it's as real as it gets. Think about his life. Jesus, who is everything of God, coming to the filth of his creation. When he's 12 years old, he gets scolded by his parents because he's teaching. He's teaching in the temple. For 18 years, he works with his dad as a carpenter, and finally he gets to the place where he's baptized. And in that baptism, it's an amazing thing. And the dove comes down, and the heavens open up, and the voice says, "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased." And you would think in that moment, Jesus could walk out of the water and he could conquer the world. But he doesn't do it, right? He goes to the wilderness, and he fasts and he prays for 40 days and 40 nights, and when he comes back, he chooses his disciples. We know those backward disciples that he chose. He didn't choose the teachers, the leaders of the law of the day. He chose a tax collector and a doctor and a bunch of fishermen. And he hung out with people like lepers and the poor and the sinners and the partiers and the prostitutes. And he doesn't do it all to gain power for himself so that he can take over in the earthly kingdom in which he lived. He does it so that he can serve. And he says things like, turn the other cheek. And he says things like, if somebody asks you to walk a mile with them, walk 2. And he says, love your enemies. And he says, I didn't come to be served, but I came to serve. And then, at the height of his power, he doesn't take over everything, but he allows others to take over him. and they end up putting him on a cross. And many people in the day missed the whole thing because they were looking for someone else. They were looking for something different. But isn't that how it goes? Oftentimes we try to put God in a box and say, God, you better answer my prayers like this. This is how I would expect you to miraculously take care of my circumstances that I find myself in. And God says, I'm going to help you out, but I'm going to do it a little differently because I have something for you that goes greater than the circumstances you find yourself. Because the reality of God isn't defined by our expectations of Him. Isaiah puts it this way, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Jesus came. Why did He come? Jesus came because He wanted to give life to you and to me. Jesus came so that we could be no longer separated from the God of creation, but we could have relationship with Him. Jesus came so that He could put a love in our heart that goes beyond ourselves, that allows us to love in ways that we otherwise wouldn't. Jesus came so that we could be forgiven. Jesus came so that we could be transformed. Jesus came so that He could get down on our level and look to us in our face as we're lying there and pour life into our lives to raise us back to life again. Here we have an almighty God and all of His greatness. And He stoops down and He looks at us. And He said, let me take away your burdens. Let me take away your troubles. Let me take away the pain that you find yourself in. And He goes to the cross and He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we were talking about this in Sunday school this morning. Jesus experienced everything that we experienced and more. And in that moment on the cross, He experienced an emptiness that we can't even fathom, a loneliness. And then after He gets off the cross and He rises back to life again, He's with the disciples and He says, okay, Thomas, put your hand here in my side. Okay, Thomas, take a look at my hands. This is what I did. And I did it for you so that you could have life. But not only that, He said, I did it so that I could be with you, so that we could be in fellowship together, because I know what you're going through. I've been there, I've done that, and I want to help you out. And if you put your faith in me, I'm going to restore your heart. I'm going to be with you. I want to help you. I want to carry you through the circumstances that you find yourself in. God comes near, the incarnate. God made flesh. Do you see Him? Have you experienced Him, or are you looking for something else? This is the application of Christ, not to just read about Him, to know about Him, to believe in Him, but to follow Him, to be transformed by Him. If we take that step of faith, His grace will be with us always. If we take that step of faith, He'll do a surgery on our heart. If we take that step of faith, His peace that passes understanding will be with us. And in the middle of the storm, He will make us new. But we have to open our heart to Him. Let me close with this example. A boy by the name of Justin was diagnosed with a rare cancer. And in the middle of his pain, he opened his heart to God. I mean, he really opened it up. He read the Bible in 4 months from cover to cover, and he started to go to college. He got married, and he started a Bible study and a prayer group so that he could pray for people to be healed in the midst of his cancer. And he was baptized, and he wanted to pray for others so that they could experience a life even while he was dying. And these are the words that he wrote. He said, for me, knowing that wanting to live, I tried to grow as a disciple of Christ, wanting my life to be about how to spread his story through my life, through the way that I carried myself, and through my faith, and how it carried me through living with cancer. And I wanted to do it in a public way for my family, for my friends, knowing that I made this personal commitment. Those are just a few of the words, but that's a joy that God puts in your heart, a joy that is the strength of God. Just before we stand and pray, let me share this last quote from Dr. Forth when he says this: Jesus left his place and came to our place to take our place so that we can go back to his place. And just knowing God, following him, being changed by him, being used by him. Would you stand with me as we pray together this morning? Thank you, God. Thank you for coming from your place to this place so that one day we can go back to your place. And in the meantime, God, we can have a relationship with you here and now. God, I pray that you would allow us to make the choice to live in your presence in our lives in such a way that we could experience the very thing that we were looking for. That you would bring life from these dead bones in a way that would fill us and transform us. We don't want to just know about you. We don't want to just believe in you. We want to experience you in a personal way and be transformed by you so that we can live our lives in a different way that will show your love and expression in your life to others so that they too would experience this fullness of life. God, I pray that you would touch our hearts, stir our soul, and allow us to live the life that you created us, not because you wouldn't do it otherwise, but because we're opening our heart to it every moment of every day. God, I pray that you would help us to not only seek it and long for it, but that we would own it and express it. Thank you, God, for this reality that your Son came and lived and died and rose again and is interceding for us on our behalf even now so that we could live a life to the full and express your love in ways that go beyond ourselves for your honor, for your glory. And all God's people said. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for being here this morning.
You're so patient.
And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next Sunday.